G'day guys, and welcome back to my channel. So again, I've come across some anomalies in the World's Fair narrative that I have been studying a little bit over the past couple of weeks, probably a little bit too much. There's other stuff to look at, but there's just so many holes in this story. Considering that we've covered two in the past, being the '93 World's Fair of Chicago and was it the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis, the St. Louis Exposition World's Fair. Now, this is the Swedish World's Fair in Stockholm of 1897. Now, it's all about listening to the years here to understand why I disagree with this narrative. And the King of Sweden started a petition, well, answered a petition from the people that they wanted their own World's Fair, and they started theirs in 1895 and finished it in 1897. The Chicago World's Fair took 18 months to build, and I mean their place is 20 times more glorious than this place. Not that this is not glorious, don't get me wrong, but the buildings of the Chicago World's Fair and the St. Louis World Fair are next level architecture, stuff that is just incredible. You would see it in Rome and all across Europe. So my problem with this narrative is in the first paragraph, second paragraph perhaps. They talk about the biggest building there, which was the prominent buildings of the Exposition. It was a 16,820 meters squared exposition hall in wood, okay? In wood. Now, that's a huge accomplishment. It's a massive building. These buildings are still here. Some of these are still here today. Now, why are they building some in wood, non-permanent, and some are permanent? Who decided which building would be non-permanent and which building would be permanent? And why does it fit so conveniently with the restructuring of a reset or a false narrative to claim the buildings as your own? It just demolished it. I mean, look here. Designed by some noob named Ferdinand Boberg, let's not even give him any appreciation, featuring a 100-meter cupola, 4 minarets, demolished after the Exposition. However, together with many other pavilions built in non-permanent materials. So they built buildings in non-permanent materials, and they built buildings to last forever. Does this make sense to you? Because I can tell you right now, they don't look like they're made out of wood. And if you've followed any of my prior videos, you'll know that what they do, so they say, well, this one is clearly not as what I'm about to say, but something like this. They would build the structure in wood, plaster, and create a putty called staff, which represents marble. So they're trying to tell you right now that, for example, this building was demolished, but this building can stay, because this building was non-permanent, but this one was at the same fair. It's just an atrocious lie. They're all over the world with the spires, which I believe to be some sort of energy harnessing device. I can't prove that, and I don't think anyone can. But I don't think the ancients built for just the beauty of a building. I think they all had a purpose. Perhaps it was just for the beauty, but we don't build like that today. I mean, go outside and have a look at your city. To the modern eye, yes, it's clean and beautiful, but is it beautiful? It's just toasters, big rectangles and squares all over the place. Nothing artistic and cultural, nothing to define where you are in the world. And honestly, you wouldn't know where you are in the world if you're dropped into a World's Fair in the 1800s. You would not know where you are in the world. You would assume Europe. So after the close of the Exposition on the 3rd, 1897, the large industrial hall was torn down by but the Nordic Museum continued to be used and still remains in Stockholm. So don't need the industrial hall, but we do need the Nordic Museum. Now, did they decide that they were going to build this one non-permanent and this one permanent at the start? Doesn't say anything about that. Just says that they pulled this one down and they kept this one. But the narrative is it's built in wood. So did they come back and reinforce it with concrete and brick? Bullshit, Wikipedia. That's all I have to say. Now, recently I've had a couple of people, maybe 2 in the last week, get back to me on Instagram or on the comments section here saying these structures are completely legit. The builders were masons, master masons, and the reason that we don't have buildings like this continually built over the years is because it's very expensive, they say, to build this way, and not many master builders like this around, and the cost would just be too high and the wait, etc., would be too long. But in the space of 10 years, about 10 years, we've covered 3, all of which look the same, essentially, with the same type of building structures. So what, is the architect building for 3 years in Chicago, 1891 to 1893. As soon as he finishes there, he's moving over to Sweden and he's building from 1893 to 1897. And the second he's finished in 1897, he's moving over to St. Louis and he's building the exact same structures again and again. And if it's so hard to get these architects, why is it so easy in the early 1800s or late 1800s to acquire architects that can build this type of structures? I don't see any architect building anything like this to this scale or this intricacy right now. It might be modern looking and mathematically astounding and very tall, but they're just towers, or big rectangle towers. So it's a very busy lifestyle, that 10 years for these architects. They did not stop. And if you want to delve further into the holes in that, each architect named at World's Fairs all have other jobs going on at the exact same time. Maybe 4 or 5 each. You know, we've looked at Louis Sullivan, who had 5 or 6 or 7 jobs. But not only that, he had 7 jobs, 3 or 4 of which were in Chicago, 1 was in New Orleans, 1 was in St. Louis. So he was in 3 different places at once in the 1800s. He wasn't flying to these locations, surely. So how did they do that? And how did every other architect do that? It's bullshit, that's why. Okay, so now for something completely different. Campbell from Didactic channel, a good friend of mine and an amazing researcher. I love his channel, you've got to go check him out. And thank you to Campbell for the shout out and for all the new subs from Campbell's channel. You know, welcome. And he was talking about these 2 objects here, which sparked my interest because he's absolutely right. These are amazing models to have so early in our history at these so-called World's Fairs. And the narrative is that these World's Fairs, most of the buildings that they kept that were permanent turned into museums around the world. And obviously the scientific community were all in on this big lie and almost banking in on this lie to show off their lies, in my opinion. Campbell was talking about, I'm just going to go to his page here, in 24 minutes into his video, he was showing this here. Now this was a excavated site and these structures were all dug up, and this here dinosaur, you know, we're talking about an ancient civilization. How would they know about dinosaurs? We're talking, you know, around the time of Jesus, maybe possibly much earlier. We don't know. And it got me to thinking, if there's buildings that are built in the 1700s and then later we dug them out, as you can see here, in the 1800s, whenever these buildings were originally built, if we dug them out, did we find dinosaurs in these areas that we dug out around these buildings? Because I know that there's dinosaurs found much shallower than this drop over here. When you think about it, all around the world we find mud flood buildings that have been dug out of the mud around the early 1800s and earlier. But no talk of dinosaurs being found in these areas, yet in the 1820s all of a sudden dinosaurs are being found, and much shallower than this here. Over here, much shallower than this. This is very deep, and you can see some Roman style columns down here. So if there's dinosaurs found in this depth, then were dinosaurs walking around at the same time this was being built? Obviously, I'm taking the piss, but then you look into the dinosaur story and, I stopped really believing that narrative a long time ago, and Eric Debay convinced me that with his research on the backstory of dinosaurs, I just don't buy it. This guy here is the father of dinosaur discovery, Richard Owen, and obviously a Mason. And I think that most of the people in the scientific community were a Mason. And it all ties in somehow if you think that the World's Fairs in the 1800s are booming. They're sites that they can display their theories. And back then people can't compare theories. They don't know. They're just listening and learning and believing. And to me it looks like almost giant bones. When you look at it, you got to remember that they never found full dinosaurs. They just found like a thigh bone and ribs and vertebrae, which if you stand that up, it could be a large human. I'm just speculating, but I believe the original story is this fella right here, who, mind you, stole his idea, like a good Mason steals every idea they have, be it they're stealing masonry or they're stealing ideas. He found a tooth, and that sparked dinosaurs, a tooth, which is pretty far-fetched, to find a tooth and therefore dinosaurs exist. But of course, these teeth and bones were then displayed in museums, or the World's Fair first and then museums, because most of the buildings inside the World's Fairs became museums, storing artifacts of an ancient civilization. After they'd ransacked it and had their gold rush, the rest was put on display. Most was demolished, but the rest was put on display. Something to think about there, whether or not the dinosaur story is legit. I for one think it's bullshit, because I've definitely seen dinosaurs found much shallower than this, which can only assume that they were walking around with these ancient people, if you follow the historical narrative and the sediment that has fallen using Wikipedia's own knowledge. Or there was a mud flood, dinosaurs didn't exist, and it's all just a cover-up. And dinosaurs support Darwin's theory of evolution. They support his book, Something of Origins, Don't Care, which he would have displayed in World Exposition, had his own stand or building to preach his story of evolution. And of course, everyone would have swallowed it, just because that's what people do. They just believe what the leaders are telling them, or the leaders of the scientific community anyway. Anyway guys, I'm going to leave it there for today. Until next time, my name's Phil, and this is Tartarian Zephyr. Have a nice rest of your day or evening. See you later.